Welcome back to the Soundtracker Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Peacock. This is like my sixth attempt at this intro, and I have no idea why this one's so difficult because it's really simple, but for some reason I just keep fucking things up. So, if this is your first time listening, thank you for listening. If you've been here since the beginning, as always, thank you so much. If you want to keep up with the show, you can do so over on Twitter at Soundtracker with an underscore at the end. But yeah, it's Reservoir Dogs, my first Tarantino movie of the show, and I'm really glad this is the one that Matt decided to go with because, as I said in the show, this is starting at the beginning. This is pretty much the movie that set the tone and soundtrack that set the tone for everything Tarantino's done going forward, both in terms of the films that he makes and the soundtracks that go along with them. So great place to start on this. And yeah, I'm going to get to it here in just a second. As always, one thing that would help immensely is if you like this show, if you've been listening, or if this is your first time and you've enjoyed this episode, give me a rating over on Apple because that always helps with a small show like this. But yeah, I'm going to get to it right now. So I hope you all enjoy. It's Reservoir Dogs.
Ain't no use running, ain't nowhere to hide. The beast is coming and he's got you in his sights. He ain't gonna miss you and he ain't gonna mess around. If you're a movie with original songs, the soundtrack are gonna track you down. Oh yeah!
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm joined today by Matt Christman. Matt, how are you?
I'm good.
So you chose ultimately Reservoir Dogs. Now, when you had messaged me, I had asked you a while ago, and you had said Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs. You were kind of like between the two of them. So what ultimately made you fall on Reservoir Dogs? And was it right away like you were like, I want to do a Tarantino movie sort of thing?
When I was a teenager, I almost exclusively listened to movie soundtracks. I did not buy albums because, for the most part, I was worried that I was going to get ripped off. A song I like listening to might be good, but what about the rest of the songs on the album? What if they're not good? Then I'm stuck with this thing that I got to listen to. And so to minimize my risk, I guess, I just got into listening to movie soundtracks. And the Reservoir Dogs soundtrack really was the first one that I went out and bought after seeing the movie because of how arresting the songs were in the context of the film when I saw it. And so Tarantino was the gateway to me being a soundtrack guy. So I knew I wanted to do a Tarantino because, it was so foundational for me. And it was between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. And even though Pulp Fiction is probably a more like seminal soundtrack of the 90s, I picked Reservoir Dogs one because it was the first one for me. And also, honestly, there's more bangers, in my opinion, on the Reservoir Dogs soundtrack. There's great songs on the Pulp Fiction soundtrack, but just the ratio of bangers on that soundtrack to me is so compelling that I wanted to talk about it.
On this show, I've had guests say something almost like the opposite about sound. Like even people who love soundtracks, but their thing was with the soundtrack, sometimes you would get it for one song and then the rest of the soundtrack wouldn't be great. But I kind of disagree with that because they were like these, well, obviously I disagree with that of doing this show, but like, I feel like you had a better chance of not getting fucked over by what you bought buying a soundtrack because you always had this like great mix of songs and various sort of styles on the album. Sometimes it all kind of stuck with one particular style, but yeah, you're the first person to say that, and that's something I strongly agree with, that soundtracks were kind of the way to go because you could get this really great mix, discover artists that you maybe didn't know before you got it in your hands. And I'm glad you chose this one because I actually am more familiar personally with Pulp Fiction. Just last weekend, I went to a record store here in town and they just happened to have Pulp Fiction used on vinyl. So I snagged that up right away, but I was like, sucks that it wasn't Reservoir Dogs, like in preparation for this episode. But, obviously like I've listened to Reservoir Dogs quite a few times over the years, but for me, I kind of went the opposite way where for me, it was more so Pulp Fiction that I listened to, but it's kind of cool that this is the one that got you into soundtracks in the first place.
Yeah, because I saw the movie. I rented two movies for that weekend. That one and Weekend at Bernie's 2. And I'd already watched Weekend at Bernie's 2 earlier in the day. And then after everyone's in bed, I watched Reservoir Dogs. And it was so just bracing and unlike anything I'd really seen to that point in my life, that having all the main characters die at the end and everything, I was so shaken that I had to rewatch immediately Weekend at Bernie's again as like a palate cleanser to like wind down in order to go to sleep because I was just so indelibly marked by having watched it. And two of the things that really stuck with me were, of course, the opening sequence of everyone walking in slow motion to Little Green Bag, a song I'd never heard before. And then the torture scene with Stuck in the Middle with You, another song I'd never heard before. And so shortly after that, I knew I had to have that album. And I got the tape and then I listened to that all the time.
So two things here. This is funny that I am this is like my barely over 20 episodes here. And there have been now 2 references to Weekend at Bernie's 2 on this show. So Simon Barrett brought it up during the Black Roses episode. And the other thing, so did you see Reservoir Dogs before you even saw Pulp Fiction? Because I went the opposite way. I hadn't seen Reservoir Dogs until I saw Pulp Fiction, and then I worked my way backwards.
No, I saw Reservoir Dogs first. I rented it so that then when Pulp Fiction came out, I was incredibly excited and I was able to go see it in the theater because my parents let me see R-rated movies, thankfully. And yeah, I was, of course, absolutely blown away by Pulp Fiction on the big screen. And then I got the CD of the Pulp Fiction soundtrack shortly after. But no, I saw Reservoir Dogs first.
Interesting. Yeah, because like I said, I worked the exact, I mean, well, this came out, Reservoir Dogs would have come out when I would have been 11 at the time that it came out. Yeah. So at that point, when I was walking myself to the video store, I'm a big horror movie guy. My parents didn't give a shit what I watched either. But if I was getting stuff outside of the horror genre, it was probably Weekend at Bernie's too, if I'm being honest. That was probably what I was grabbing. Well, I'm really glad you went with this one because Tarantino soundtracks are always awesome. And the one I've had people ask to do the most so far on the show, like for a future episode, like, hey, you should do this one, is Jackie Brown. But I feel like this is the best place to start because at some point I will get to everything of his.
Of course.
But start at the beginning. So
yeah.
Let me do a quick little background and then we can talk about the movie. So Reservoir Dogs debuted at Sundance on January 21st, 1992. It didn't actually hit theaters until October 23rd, 1992. And at that point, it only released in 19 theaters, but it took 15th place with $150,000. So that led to it expanding to 61 theaters, where it made almost $3 million on a budget of, now this is weird. There's some discrepancy over the budget on this. You can find 1 million, you can find 3 million, but regardless, it either made a little bit of money or it broke even because, this wasn't one that they were going to put millions of dollars into advertising. So pretty much the cost of the movie was what they needed to make back.
Right.
And, accolades and reviews at the time were overwhelmingly positive and honestly have only improved with time. It was recently actually named the greatest independent film of all time by Empire. So as I'll always do, even though, like I said, this was a very limited theatrical release, I'll give the top 10. This is a pretty good top 10, actually. The top 10 movies the weekend it was released were, number 1 was Under Siege.
Hell yes.
I know. I'm pretty sure that Under Siege has popped up in the show a couple times also when I'm doing these top 10s. Last of the Mohicans at number 2. Candyman at
I saw in the theater.
Did you really?
Yeah.
See, now, I remember the first time I saw that. It was after it had come out on video. That was one that I did not get around to in theater. Now, number 3, Candyman, that's one that I saw in theaters.
See, I did not. I'm not actually sure I've ever seen Candyman all the way through.
Oh, it's a genuinely awesome 90s horror movie. Number 4 is The Mighty Ducks. So this is like a streak that I'm on now where I come across a movie in the top 5 that I'm convinced isn't a real movie until I look and I actually have to look and make sure that it was real. Number 5 is Consenting Adults, which stars Kevin Kline, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, and Kevin Spacey. And it was one of those movies that came out during the era where Hollywood was kind of mining cuckoldry as a plot device, like Indecent Proposal and Disclosure.
Yes.
And yeah. So there was like a 2-year period where that was like a hot topic in Hollywood movies. Number 6 was Pure Country. Number 7 was Dr. Giggles.
Larry Drake, who played a developmentally disabled like mailroom clerk in LA Law. That's how I remember him. And then he was Dr. Giggles.
See,
and the bad guy in Darkman too.
I was going to say he's Durant for me. That's who I'll always know him as. I love Dr. Giggles too, but Darkman's like one of my 90s favorites. Night in the City, which is a significantly lesser De Niro, Jessica Lange film to Cape Fear. Number 9 is A River Runs Through It, and 10 is Mr. Baseball, the Tom Selleck comedy.
Oh yeah, it goes to Japan.
Yeah, yeah. I that's one that I've probably seen a dozen times because of like cable and HBO as a kid, but it has been probably since about 1993 since the last time I saw it. So I always like the casting things. Tom Waits auditioned at one point for this movie, and Tarantino has said that he knew he wasn't going to get a role, but he just wanted to hear him say the Madonna part, recite those lines. And Tarantino famously wanted to play Mr. Pink, and told Steve Buscemi,
because he really did think he was an actor there. In fact, he wanted to be an actor, I think, more than he wanted to make movies for a while.
yeah.
And those early movies when you can see he really did imagine that he was an actor.
What was that?
And then
movie
you just think of him going even farther with that delusion and taking a part like Mr. Pink and making it him, and you just cringe. At least I do, imagining him being Mr. Pink.
Oh yeah, I mean he wasn't. I'm glad that it did not work out. What was that movie that Destiny Turns on the Radio?
Destiny Turns on the Radio, which I of course saw because of Tarantino. I ended up seeing almost every Tarantino knockoff that came out during the 90s, which was like exposing yourself to radioactive waste. Just a collection of just punishingly terrible films, and that was one of the worst ones.
Killing Zoe's not bad.
It's okay. By the way, Avery had a movie come out like a year ago, and it's on Hulu, and it is just apocalyptically terrible. And it's like, I know that guy like has spent 20 years is like embittered and assuming and thinking about how he is the real talent. Watch that movie and you'll know that he was absolutely a barnacle on Tarantino's hull, and he's fucking lucky that he got that Oscar, that pity Oscar for screenwriting.
Yeah, I didn't know he was still working, honestly. Like that.
It's called Lucky Day. It was from 2019.
Wait,
absolute dog shit.
Who is in that? Anyone famous?
It's even supposed to be it's apparently supposed to be a sequel to Killing Zoe, because it's like the character getting back out of jail. I haven't seen Killing Zoe since the 90s, so I've forgotten. But terrible film.
The name rings a bell. I did not realize that was his. Speaking of Tarantino as an actor, the only movie where he was good as an actor was From Dusk Till Dawn, but that's because his character was a giant fucking creep.
Yes, a perverted foot fetishist. Yeah.
But yeah, obviously Buscemi ended up at the role because Tarantino told him if he could blow him away in the audition, he'd let him have it. And it's Steve Buscemi. Like I'll talk a lot more about his performance when we get to the movie because he's just so good in this movie.
Oh, fantastic.
James Woods at one point was who Tarantino wanted to be in the movie, and he actually made him 5 different cash offers. Now, here's the thing. Woods' agent is who kept refusing these offers, and he never told James Woods about it, just because the sum was way below his usual salary. But when they met for the first time down the road, Woods learned of it and was like super pissed and fired his agent and got a new agent just because of that. And he didn't tell him what role it was because he said whoever it was magnificent anyways. And speculation is that it was Mr. Orange.
Okay.
So that would have been a pretty different movie with him in the role of Tim Roth, like replacing those.
I feel like he would have been too old at that point.
And James Woods
was like in his 40s at that. Like,
and he was.
I would have loved it because like at that point, James Woods was one of my absolute favorite actors.
Oh. I've talked about this. I don't give a shit. Like James Woods is James Woods, but like I'm not going to never watch Digstown again.
Digstown's an amazing movie.
It's so good. It's so
Digstown
good.
Is phenomenal.
I was furious it didn't have a soundtrack when I was going through this because that was one that I was like, oh hell, I'd love to talk about Digstown.
Talk about Digstown. Who would turn that down?
I know. It's a great movie. The Hard Way. Yeah, he was in some really great shit in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Viggo Mortensen auditioned at one point for there was a Hispanic character that was going to have a role with Keitel, and he didn't get the role. And I think it didn't work out that way. And then Tarantino wanted to be in The Hateful Eight, but he couldn't be in that because of scheduling conflicts. John Cryer was offered the role of Mr. Pink, and he turned it down because he didn't understand the script.
I don't understand. Are they robbing a bank? Where is it? I don't see the bank robbery.
One of them's a cop. Matt Dillon was going to be Mr. Blonde. Nicolas Cage was considered the role of Nice Guy Eddie. Ving Rhames and Samuel Jackson at one point were considered for Holdaway. Now, this is funny. Tim Roth originally refused to read for the film, but he agreed after he got really drunk with Quentin and Harvey Keitel, and they basically begged him to do it. And then, so that's all the casting stuff. As far as budget things, originally he had $30,000. He was going to make it with friends, but he had gotten the script to Harvey Keitel through a mutual friend, Keitel called him and said he wanted to be in it as well as produce it. So that's how we ended up with what we had. However, even with that, the budget was so low, and this is really fucking funny. The budget was so low that a lot of the actors were asked to bring in their own clothing as wardrobe, most notably being Chris Penn's tracksuit. So that shitty tracksuit that he's wearing in the movie was right out of his own closet.
God, that's such an amazing fit.
I know. I mean, it's a very 1992 color.
Yeah. Oh no, it tells you exactly when that movie is being shot.
Yeah,
It's just
like
perfect.
every expansion team that was coming to the leagues was
Yep, that teal.
I had a Hornets jacket. I was a Hornets fan because of that color.
Yeah,
The black
if I could
suit,
get a hold of a nice guy Eddie tracksuit, I would absolutely cop that immediately.
oh, for sure, for sure. You could probably find it at a thrift store pretty easily if you looked around a little bit. Maybe not the exact one, but that color.
Yeah.
The black suits were provided by a designer who actually loved the genre of American crime films. Buscemi wore his own black jeans instead of suit pants. So if you look, he's wearing black jeans during the production. And Michael Madsen had to wear a jacket and pants that came from two different suits during the movie. The Cadillac Coupe de Ville in the movie is Michael Madsen's, and that's because they didn't have enough money to rent a car for the character. Madsen went method with Kirk Baltz when Kirk Baltz asked to ride in the trunk to experience what it was really like. He agreed, but he also decided he was going to do his own character development. So he drove down long alleys with potholes and then a Taco Bell drive-through before he took him back and let him out.
You get a Crunchwrap Supreme to go with the soda?
Well, that's one of the things I love in that movie when I'm getting ahead of myself, but when he shows up with a soda in his hand after like murdering a whole bank full of people or a whole store full of people and keeping a cop in his trunk, that he like stopped to get something to drink on the way back too.
Very cool.
Yeah, he didn't. And the torture scene, there was a whole bunch of stuff with the torture scene where Madsen didn't want to do it. He didn't do the dance until the day of. He had no idea what to do. It just said he dances. He had no clue what the fuck the dance was supposed to look like. He really got thrown off guard because Kirk Baltz ad-libbed the part about he has a child at home and he had just become a new father himself, and that he like almost couldn't even finish the scene because it fucked him up so bad in the middle of filming it.
Yeah.
Robert Kurtzman did the special makeup effects for free. Robert Kurtzman's if anybody who doesn't know is old school special effects guy. He also wrote the story for From Dusk Till Dawn, which is what made him do it for free. He had Quentin Tarantino write the script based around his story. So they like worked out a deal. Oh, and speaking of like some of the torture scene problems, there were a bunch of walkouts during this movie, famously. And one of the most famous walkouts was when 15 people walked out at one of the film festivals. Two of those people were Rick Baker, makeup effects guy, The Thing, and Wes Craven. Now, Baker told Tarantino to take it as a compliment just because, the heightened sense of realism. Whereas Wes Craven is one of those guys, if you've ever listened to an interview with him or a commentary, he was one of the most thoughtful, intelligent, like I really love. Yeah. He was off on this one though. He did not mean it as a compliment. He was genuinely disgusted with it, where he said that he felt like it was where like A Last House on the Left was meant to show that like violence is bad. He felt like Reservoir Dogs was glorifying it, which I mean, I feel like Tarantino's whole thing is with violence. I don't think his brain operates that.
That's the thing. Like you can't judge him by that parameter because he is so removed from reality.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hyper stylized. Like his approach to like making movies, like, there's a reason that, there's this like Tarantino connected universe, because like he literally is operating in a fantasy realm where like films literally compose reality. And in that, like violence, like, oh, it's cool. It's like, well, yeah, of course it's cool. Like, I'm sorry, even in the movies that are trying to make violence look bad, still make it look cool.
Right. And there are going to be some people who see it that way, but there are going to be plenty of people like myself who see it both ways. Like, yeah, it's brutal, but also kind of cool.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, and like the closest Tarantino's come really to like injecting any sort of commentary or politics into any of his films in the first place is like Nazis are bad in Glorious Bastards, which is not really taking a strong stance in the first place.
Well, I think it's really cool in that movie is how he's like, okay, we're killing Nazis, and this is like good. This is good because it's a good message. But wait a minute, it's also cool violence. You're still getting off on this, and like, aren't you really just using the badness of the villains as an excuse for getting off on this aesthetic violence?
people cheered in the theater when I saw Inglourious Bastards when Hitler got his face vaporized.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, like I said, I just don't think Tarantino's brain operates in a way most people's do. So whatever. Like, well, I'll get to more of that too, as far as like some of the Tarantino, the groundswelling of like, seems like every couple years, I gotta get ahead of myself a little bit, but every couple years there's like a groundswell of like, well, he's bad and blah blah blah, and like that shit's all pops and whistles to me. Like, whatever. So Lawrence Tierney and Edward Bunker had met before the movie even filmed, and this is because, and this is again very funny knowing these two's backgrounds, they got into a fist fight in a Los Angeles parking lot way back in the 1950s.
That makes sense.
And Tierney famously was very difficult with this movie. At the end of the first week of shooting, he fired a gun at his nephew, and he was arrested. It was a .357 fucking Magnum.
Jesus Christ.
Hit the walls of his apartment, and at the end of the first week of shooting, and he was fired, and he was let out of jail Monday morning, only bailed out so he could finish the movie, but Quentin Tarantino said he'd never work with him again, and Lawrence Bender, the producer, didn't even find out about the incident until the filming was almost completed. And then finally, in the time since Reservoir Dogs has come out, it's inspired decades of independent films and shitty knockoffs, and it's also inspired two shitty video games, a heist in the game Payday 2, and there's actually a Bollywood movie called Kante. We were talking about knockoffs, which is sort of a remake of Reservoir Dogs, and it's actually pretty good. Tarantino's a pretty big fan of it. He thought it was a really good homage remake, because it's not quite a remake, but sort of.
Yeah.
Okay, so about the movie itself. Let's talk about the movie itself. Okay, so Reservoir Dogs, it's not my favorite Tarantino movie. I mean, even my least favorite Tarantino movie, which I guess for me would be Hateful Eight, I still love.
Absolutely. Same here.
I think, like I said, I think, in my gut, if I had to pick a favorite, in my gut, my gut wants to say Inglourious Bastards, but my heart wants to say Jackie Brown. But like, it's such a hard thing. And the thing is, if I sat and watched all of his movies in a row, I would probably change my mind as I was watching them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
for sure.
There's this groundswell every couple of years, and I think we either just ended one or maybe we're at the tail end of one where it's like people pointing out like, well, he's bad, and it just whatever. I don't give a shit. I say what you will. The guy has made incredible movies throughout his career, and
absolutely.
Even like, I mean, True Romance that he didn't actually direct. Goddamn, True Romance is so good.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And the thing I like about Tarantino is, he's got this like blend of like grindhouse and art house sensibilities that like has made his work what it is. That's what gives him such a distinct voice. Because I mean, really, he's a bunch of patchworks of other things, but in such a unique way that it's distinctly a Tarantino movie every time you see one.
Right.
And yeah, like I said, the violence, people I think complain about the violence being glorified. But like I said, I don't think he thinks that way. It's just, I just think he likes to make movies that he thinks would be cool based on what he loves. And I love that about him.
Yeah.
But yeah, so speaking of things that he loves and Tarantino sort of thing, like, there's no better way for Quentin Tarantino to introduce himself to the world than the Madonna conversation.
Absolutely.
It's basically like his career encapsulated in the very first second going into it, like, you might not even have realized that it was Quentin Tarantino at the time. Like, this is the writer director here, but even knowing like, okay, the guy who wrote and directed this, like, this is one of his thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's like the perfect Quentin Tarantino weird brain thing.
Yeah. It helped invent a genre, which is characters, instead of communicating plot or character development related information in their dialogue, just bullshitting about the same popular culture that the people watching the movie were bathed in, having the same kind of conversations that they had. I mean, now it seems very banal, but it really was just a new way of approaching that material, especially in the constraints of a genre movie.
It's just, like I said, the perfect way to introduce him. And then that whole diner scene, you really do feel like, except for, I feel like they throw a curveball at you with Mr. Blonde, because in that diner sequence, when you see him, he seems like he's like maybe just like a chill, funny guy. Like, I mean, he really does. Like, he doesn't do anything weird. He's just kind of like joking and laughing with everybody. He's all smiles, and he seems sort of warm at that point.
And he's sympathetic to the plight of waitresses.
Yeah.
6 times. What if she's too fucking busy?
Well, and that right there too establishes is that like Mr. Pink in a room full of people who are like criminals and psychopaths, he's the biggest slime ball in the group based on that one particular bit of dialogue. Like he's the guy who won't tip a server. And I realize he's got his well thought out reasons, but he's still a prick for it.
Yeah.
But that's like his whole thing. And that's part of why he's the one who, now he doesn't get away scot-free, but he's the one who doesn't die in the end. He's a slimy little fucker.
Yeah. He's not going to fucking stick his neck out. Literally hiding during the big Mexican standoff at the end.
Well, that's, he's the type of character who he's never, you've got guys who have like been in the shit before, all of these guys have been in the shit before. And that scene where they're beating up the cop and he takes a swing. He's not he's not that guy. He takes a swing and what does he do? Jumps back because he fucking hurt his hand. Like he gets by on being smart and conniving, basically, is kind of how he's gotten to where he is. But yeah, you kind of get this really good introduction of all the characters. Keitel does the like grizzled criminal who's kind of like, you feel like he's at a point where he's he's sort of over this shit, but he also kind of likes it.
Yeah.
And Eddie Bunker, if you know anything about his past, I wish they had given him more to do.
Youngest person ever sent to San Quentin.
Yeah. I wish that they had given him more to do in the movie. That's like if I had one complaint, you have Eddie Bunker in it. And like, I mean, he has probably a total of 5 lines, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know Lawrence Tierney's a pain in the ass, but again, in that diner scene, like his whole reaction to finding out that Mr. Pink doesn't tip is just so goddamn funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, then you've got that, like you said, that really awesome shot of, I mean, it's the super famous them walking to Little Green Bag. Yes. And I love so one thing I do like about that though is it goes from like, here's these fucking cool guys walking down the street and like, look how cool they are, to immediately everything has gone fucking sideways.
Yes, just blood everywhere, screaming. Yes.
I actually found out during you come to him. They actually had a paramedic on set during the movie to gauge whether or not his blood loss was realistic or if he would die.
Yeah.
Because it does look like, watching it, I mean, it literally looks like he's lost like 2 bodies worth of blood in that.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
But yeah, it's just, the screaming and then they find which is how they kept the budget low. This basically outside of a few other shots, it's a single, and I'm a huge fan of single location movies anyways. Yeah. And you've got that great location that they use when they finally hole up, where everything is just waiting for Joe to get there. And then as Tarantino does, then you start your jumping around. And I also like, again too, when you find out through conversation that Mr. Blonde is a fucking nutcase, as opposed to, because the heist wasn't shown initially because they didn't have the budget for it, but once they got a little bit more money, Tarantino decided to like still go with it that way.
Yeah, definitely the right call.
But yeah, and then once you hear that about Mr. Blonde, you're pretty sure he's going to show up again. You don't know at that. Again, speaking is like, if you're first time seeing it, maybe he doesn't come back because you don't know who's dead, who's not.
Right.
But it leaves you anticipating like, oh shit, well, what happens when this fucker comes back?
Yeah. And then he does with it just an amazing, as you said, with just leaning against the post with the drink. It's just a perfect contrast of cool exterior, but now we know this is actually not cool, at least not the way you thought it was. He's actually a complete psycho.
Yeah, his return is genuinely like scary once he shows back up, because he's he's just standing and watching, drinking a drink calmly. Yep. So, and I do love when they do the like, I know that it's not like it was like Tarantino started this, but yeah, I feel like, even now I know people that when they have shows or movies that jump around in time, people that are like, they have trouble following it, which is like a strange thing to me, but like I know plenty of people that have trouble if it like jumps around in time. But, he could have played the narrative out straight if he had wanted to. You absolutely could have told a linear story with this. Certainly. Outside of like the people meeting Joe, those sort of flashbacks. But like from the moment the heist goes on until everything happens, you could have played it completely straight, but it wouldn't have been as good. I like everybody finding out how everybody got there. And Tarantino is so good at common people getting caught up in the middle of crazy shit in really funny ways. The ultimate example being when that woman gets plugged in the back of the leg in Pulp Fiction by Ving
Yes.
Rhames. But in this, it's when Buscemi's foot chase when he yanks her from that car. Oh,
Yeah.
and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but they also didn't have the money to shut down streets. So when they filmed that scene, they had to keep waiting for green lights to make that happen. Yeah, Buscemi, I mean, he kind of steals this movie with his little he gets so many good lines. Where's the commode in this dungeon? I gotta take a squirt. Okay, did you ever try to light a Zippo lighter that weird way that Keitel
With the
does
snap? Yes, I did.
it doesn't
Yes,
work very
absolutely.
well.
After seeing that, when I got my hands on one, I did. And I did get it to work.
Oh, it does, but it works about as well as it does for him in the movie where it takes like 6
It's like,
tries.
what are you doing, man? Just flick the thing.
But yeah, as I said, when Blonde shows back up with that fucking pop in his hands, and then I couldn't remember watching it last night whether or not they even mentioned that to him, and he does say at one point, like Keitel says, like, "Do you want some fries with your soda or something?" But that's like the only mention of the fact that he did that. But like they don't make a big point of the fact that it happened. But it's really again, it makes him so much crazier that he's literally riding around with a fucking cop in his trunk.
Yeah.
And he's just like, I'm thirsty. I'm going to pull into probably Big Kahuna Burger.
It was probably Big Kahuna Burger. We got to assume. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know if he had developed that idea yet, but just retroactively, it's Big Kahuna Burger. Oh, Seymour Scagnetti is a tremendous name for a.
And
like
Scagnetti is another one of those Tarantino names that he uses over and over again, like in his script for Natural Born Killers. Super Cop Jack Scagnetti.
That's right. I haven't seen that in a minute. So that's right. Yeah, there's certain names. Well, obviously the Vic Vega, Vincent Vega thing, but they mention a Marcel, even not even last names. They mention a Marcellus in Reservoir Dogs. Yeah, he's got certain names that he absolutely loves. So, okay, when they go out and grab that cop, speaking of songs here, I Gotcha as a song choice over that particular scene.
With the balloon trailing behind the car.
Yes. It's such a great choice in that movie. Chris Penn also. Chris Penn is with his small limited role. I love like when you see again, Blonde being a complete psychopath, you still get to see points where he like is just guys being dudes things with him and Chris Penn together when they're hanging out, just being like goofy meathead buddies.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and another thing too, when Nice Guy Eddie, when he's in the car and he's trying to explain how everything went to shit, he's really funny in that part because he's like desperately like trying to get out of that conversation.
I don't know who's dead. I don't know who's alive. I don't know who's shot. I don't know who's not. Does it sound like I'm fucking joking? He's driving around with a fucking cop in his trunk. Great phone acting.
Well, and you know what? This predates Guantanamo sort of discussions by a very long time, but even Nice Guy Eddie understands that fucking torture like that doesn't work.
I'll tell you, he started the goddamn Chicago fire, but that don't necessarily make it fucking so.
Okay, so the torture ear scene. So when everybody walks out, again, knowing what you know about Mr. Blonde, when he takes off his fucking coat and says, "What is he? Was it we're alone at last? Finally, we're
alone at last,
dude." And then explaining that like he doesn't give a shit about it. He just likes the idea of torturing a cop, and he thinks torture's fun.
Yeah,
that as far as like great psychopath characters go, and like people who are again, up until that point, you've not seen him do anything. I mean, the little bit
you know what he's capable of, but you haven't seen it actually played out.
Right. He's had very few lines in the movie. I mean, he does a great job with "You're gonna bark all day, little doggy."
Yeah,
but like outside of that, your experience with him has been basically the bit at the diner where he seems okay, and then shit you hear about him in between.
Yeah.
But as soon as he takes off his coat and says that, based on what you've heard about him, like what a build up to making this character genuinely fucking scary.
Mm-hmm.
But and I another touch that I love too is when he starts his dance, he turns the radio on and he goes over and leans over to Orange, and the cop sees him like it's his like dying colleague. and he looks up at the cop and gives that fucking smile.
Mm-hmm.
And then the music starts, and there's that like sort of weird angled shot of the cop looking.
Yes, I know. That's when you started talking about it. I was thinking of that shot too. That with the guitars coming in the beginning of that song, and his just giant wild eyes as he watches. He's looking at Madsen walking in front of him, just terrifying.
Yeah, I'm surprised Kirk Baltz. Tarantino likes to pull a lot of people back into his movies, and I'm kind of surprised that he's one who has not, because
yeah, it's not like he was doing anything else.
Right. Yeah, I looked up his IMDb, and like he's worked, but it's always like very small roles. I mean, his number one listed thing on IMDb is Reservoir Dogs.
Of
and
course.
he spends half of his role tied to a chair, more than half.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then when the gas can comes out, like I guess I can understand watching it where maybe if I were somebody who were like queasy about violence, because really when the ear gets cut off, you don't even fucking see it.
No, tasteful pan away.
Yeah, you see the giant mess on his head afterwards.
and then the ad lib scene where Madsen goes into the ear and he's like, "Hello, hey, what's going on?"
Oh, he ad libbed that?
Yeah, that was him.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that was an ad lib. Good job, Madsen. But I could see if I were somebody who was squeamish about violence, even if I had like made it through the ear part, as soon as the gas comes out, I could see maybe that being like a breaking point, because like, burning someone to death is really like, and the first time I saw it, I was expecting it. I'm like, oh fuck, he's gonna.
No, I was like, they totally got me. I was horrified. I was nauseated, and I was just cringing away. And I was like, oh God, he's gonna set him on fire. Oh my God. And then instead, his chest just explodes in one of the most glorious squib orgies of all time. Fucking hits the fucking camera, and you cut to Mr. Orange just unloading his piece, and that is just such a powerful, like, cathartic moment that I remember just being stunned and jaw dropped and exhilarated by that.
Well, okay,
the cavalry coming to the rescue.
and your love of squibs too. I didn't think about how that aspect of this probably appeals to you highly.
Oh yeah, no, that's one of the all-time. Just his entire chest, just.
Oh yeah, I mean he keeps shooting until the clip,
Yeah, he empties the clip into him,
and then keeps going. So let me ask you this, and this might not be something you remember, and I honestly, I certainly don't. Did you have somebody you suspected was the cop during this movie before the reveal?
I kind of assumed that Mr. Pink was just being paranoid. I don't know.
Okay.
I was a child. I was like 12. I didn't know any better. I just was like, yeah, it probably wasn't a cop. I didn't have anyone that I thought was the cop. I certainly didn't think it was, obviously didn't think it was Mr. Blonde. But
right.
Other than that, I really didn't have anybody.
Yeah, you're like Buscemi there, where he's like, I fucking know you're on the level.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then you get the whole flashback stuff with Tim Roth. I love, like,
oh, it's great.
Him learning. Well, and so here's the deal. Randy Brooks, I talked about earlier how Ving Rhames and Samuel Jackson were considered a Holdaway such a small character, but honestly, I feel like Randy Brooks might have been the best choice in this, only because both Ving Rhames and Sam Jackson have such unique characters. You know what I mean? Like, I guess this was pre-Pulp Fiction before Samuel Jackson had really carved out.
They would like kind of overwhelm it instead of just being the character, which he's able to be much more effectively, I think. He also, when they meet for the first time, he has one of those Tarantino sort of gimmick lines that he comes back to. He goes, "I'll bet everything from a diddle-eyed Joe to a damned if I know," which is also said by Dexter Spivey, played by Gary Oldman in True Romance, when Christian Slater goes to see him.
That's right. See, that's another thing. I had not picked up on that overlap there. Here's the thing. It actually has been a minute since I had watched both Reservoir Dogs and True Romance. My brother, back when it came out, got me that Tarantino box set. It was like a Blu-ray box set of everything he had done up to that point on Blu-ray. And, I worked my way through, but it had been a long time since it's been, because those were actually the two that I watched immediately when I got it, but I've had it for how many years now, and have not gone back and watched either of those since. So I think now that I've done this, I'm probably going to end up working my way back through because I actually want to revisit the Kill Bills really bad here again soon.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen those in a while. I should.
Yeah, I need to revisit them. Oh, obviously it's all fictional, but the bathroom sequence, that fucking cop that is telling that story in the bathroom when he goes in.
Asshole! I will shoot you in the face.
Just perfect casting.
This real sexy Oriental bitch.
Look, I worked at a place growing up where I met a lot of small town dipshit cops. Now I realize this isn't like a small town dipshit cop, but like where I've met a lot of small town dipshit cops who are that guy, or at least were that guy. Like that sort of like, just like you want to get away from them when they try to talk to you. Like they would, they feel like you're cornered.
Yes.
Okay, so I wonder how Tierney felt going back, or if he had read it in the script when he found out that Quentin Tarantino described him as looking like the Thing from the Fantastic Four.
I have a feeling he had no idea what that means.
Yeah, that's true.
What is this? Fantastic Four? What is that? A bunch of fairies.
So one of there's that car conversation where it's literally just like one of the big things that people have an issue with Quentin Tarantino is like the use of like just like casual like racist language in his movies. But here's the thing. These guys are fucking criminal shitheads. Do you think that's not how they're going to talk?
Yeah, of course.
I got news for you. The Wet Bandits, when you don't see them in Home Alone, this is how they talk to each other.
Just nothing but N-words.
Yeah, this is how these guys would talk in real life. Like they're gonna go fucking rob and kill if they have to, but like saying racist things is something like no, fucking course not. Even if one of them in the car maybe doesn't get down that way, they're gonna jump in and join in just so everyone else doesn't ostracize them for oh, and another thing I like about this movie too, getting up towards the end here, is literally every movie about an undercover cop goes he's in too deep route. This movie somewhat touches on it in the fact that obviously he likes Mr. White. Like
they're buddies. There's
a buddy thing there. He at one point says Joe's a cool and funny guy, but like at no point do you ever gather that he's having second thoughts about doing his job. Yeah, no, he's on a mission. He's been on a mission the whole time. Because every undercover cop movie does they're in too deep and they can't get out and they're having second thoughts. Like he's buddies with Mr. White, but he's still gonna, maybe the most he would have done for him is tried to make sure he got a more lenient sentence or something. Yeah. Oh, and then the reveal, because I mean, you really do feel like the whole movie that he was shot by either like a security guard in the bank or a cop, even though he says, I can't believe she shot me and not that cop shot me or something. Like, at least, the very least for me, the first time I saw this, I was really surprised that it turned out to be a citizen who he also kills. Yeah, that was like, holy shit. You just fucking instantly murked her. Yeah. But yeah, and then you get to the ending with the great standoff that lasts for all, and they don't drag it out. It's like they aim guns at each other. Chris Penn yells, "Stop pointing that gun at my fucking dad!" And it's over. Okay, who shoots Nice Guy Eddie? Mr. White. I don't understand this question. He shoots Joe, and then as he's falling, he turns and shoots Nice Guy Eddie. That's what I've always thought, but I wanted to make sure I didn't fucking say it wrong when we were doing the show today, so I like rewound it like 3 times. Now, apparently, there are people who think that it's like a cop coming in from like the rescue squad off screen. What? That's fucking stupid. That's idiotic. But it's one of those things where like, it's a quick shot. He's got a quick shot there if he gets both of them. But no, and I accept that. It's just one of those things where I've always been like, it's not 100% clear because I can't tell if Orange had emptied his clip, but it was like maybe at some point he had I don't know if he was like aiming a gun down there or something. So I've always wanted to just confirm that. So from somebody who, for me, I did when I saw it, I rewound that a bunch of times too. And there is like he does a little like it's subtle, and that's why it's hard to pick up. But he moves the gun a little bit. He points it a little bit over as he's going down, as his knees are buckling. And that just kind of gives you a glimpse of what a probably great shot he always has been, and why he's somebody that they bring in on bank heists or giant diamond heists.
Yeah, it just wipes out those two cops with the two pistols.
Yeah,
earlier in the movie.
Yeah, and then it wraps it all up in the only way it was going to end, just again with everybody but Steve Buscemi dying.
Yep.
But I like that they had him tell him that Keitel's reaction when he finds out he's a cop after everything that he's done. Yeah. Because really, at the end of the day, Keitel was a great fucking friend to him.
He was.
He would do anything, did everything he could to keep him comfortable, short of taking him to the hospital.
Yes, of course.
Then,
can't do that.
Well, even then, though, he broke on that. Like, he wanted to get him there. Like, he thought he was cool. Even knowing that he knew his name, he was going to get him there. So, I'm sure that he felt betrayed.
Well, actually, there was a bit in the screenplay, which I bought, that didn't make it into the movie, where it's one of the flashbacks with Holdaway and Mr. Orange, after they have identified Nice Guy Eddie's real name and real jacket because of his fandom of the Milwaukee Brewers, which means that his ass got to be from Wisconsin. And there's a story in his jacket about a cop being part of a crew getting, and he's undercover with Mr. White and other guys, and then somehow it gets tumbled, and the cop is having a surprise birthday party. Everyone's at this cop's house waiting for the cop to come and surprise him. And the door opens, and the cop is there, but so is Mr. White with a gun to his head. He blows the cop away and then just fires into the crowd of birthday party attendees.
Oh, I'm so mad that didn't
Meant to obviously tell you he really doesn't like cops.
I'm so fucking mad. I'm so mad that did not make it. Tarantino at one time said that he had thoughts, and he's since said that he's not going to, but he had at one point said that he had considered making his 10th and final directed film an update of Reservoir Dogs, where he had a budget to do more of what he had initially wanted to do with it.
That seems like the kind of thing a lot of these directors do, is that as they get older, they kind of gravitate back towards their early stuff, because all those years have accumulated and a guy like Tarantino, like clout and the ability to command a large budget, but also skill sets and new insights into the craft and new preoccupations, and I want to put them back onto that. And I mean, honestly, I could understand why that might seem like a waste of time to some people, but when you got a director like Tarantino who is as locked into fantasy as he is, I could imagine that sort of being the ideal sort of Ouroboros ending. Just like a guy who made his career referencing other films, literally just remaking his own work.
And here's the thing. No matter what, if he did it, I'd be fucking down. You know what I mean? But knowing that scene didn't make the movie, I'm like, now I want that. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think he'll actually stop at 10?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know. The thing is, he started writing now. Like, he wrote that novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I think that he's also written a number of like essays on film criticism that he's gonna put out as a collection. And the reason he always says that he wants to stop is just that directors lose their fastball when they get older, and he just can't bear the thought of making a movie that everyone kind of agrees is bad. And I can understand that. Like, when you've had a career like his, where it's like basically you either get like beloved immediately, or eventually, or within a relatively short period, people come around and realize, okay, that was pretty good. The thought of having like a genuine bomb, a stinker, must be pretty haunting. But I think it'll come down to, if he actually does try to say, okay, I'm done, just how much he'll be able to sit with that. And I think my guess is that over pretty quickly, the fear of that happening is going to be overwhelmed by whatever the hell fixation he gets around, and he'll end up making more of them, I think.
You literally nailed exactly how I feel about that whole that question. That is pretty much dead on exactly how I feel about it. Because I think he'll be one of those people who like intends to, like, I don't think he's just like full of shit. Like, well, I'm going to retire, and like with all intentions of not, but I feel like he won't be able to do it.
Nah, I think it'll be sitting there. It'll be the old gunslinger get called back out for sure.
Did you read the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I did.
How was it? I have not yet.
It's an absolutely insane book. It is, half of it is describing the careers of like forgotten 50s actors and listing the resumes of directors. It is just pure film spurgery.
Yeah, I just have not had a chance to get around to it. I got like 4 books that I'm working on, and I keep buying new ones, and I'm like, that's one I need to like make a time for, because I loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Really,
I loved it. I think it's amazing.
I actually just found out my girlfriend, that's the only Tarantino movie that she has seen at this point, and she loved it. And now I'm like excited to like, because she found out I was doing this, and she's like, she wanted to get to see this, but I didn't have time to watch it before I recorded the episode. So,
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to, I think the next step's going to be Pulp Fiction. That feels like the next, like, start here. Like,
the first big crowd pleaser.
Yeah, that's a people pleaser. But, okay. Let me ask you this. Let me see if you can answer. What would you call your favorite Tarantino?
It's tough. So I have obviously a emotional connection to Pulp Fiction that is like deep and abiding, because I saw it in the theater when I was a teen, and it like blew my goddamn mind because I was a sheltered dumbass, and it shaped my tastes ever since. So it's hard not to look at that one. But in terms of the movies that I think are just like, I watched them and I'm like, God damn, this is really just a perfectly constructed thing. I was pretty sure that it was Inglourious Bastards. And I was pretty confident for a while there that Inglourious Bastards was it. But I got to say, right now, it might be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
That one is one, I've only seen it once. So it's one that I need to get a second. I saw it. I mean, it wasn't too long ago. It hasn't been out for that long. But, that's the one I've seen of his the least at this point, because I've only seen it once. So I need to go back and give that one another go. It is up there for me. It is definitely up there for me. And I feel like if I watched it 1 or 2 more times, it could be wrestling for the top spot as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So any last words on Reservoir Dogs as a film before we get to the soundtrack? Anything you want to say about the movie before we move on?
It's a tight 90, which even Tarantino has had a hard time managing ever since. And at this point in film history, I got to retroactively just give my tip of the cap to anybody who can put together a tight 90.
It's funny you say that, because it had been a while since I watched Reservoir Dogs. So I watched it. I didn't have time this week, so I got to it last night was when I got to watch, which I'm okay with. I actually kind of like going into it, like I'm watching it the night before so that I'm like real fresh on it. And I had set aside like a 2.5 hour block because I forgot that in the realm of Tarantino movies, it's a short one.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, tremendous movie. And if for some reason you're listening to this and you've never seen it, I've said this a few times, but like fix that. Go out.
Yeah. Like I said, tight 90, you can bang that one out quick. You don't have to set aside an evening like most movies nowadays.
Yeah, if you're one of those people who's like never seen a Tarantino movie, which again, it's really hard for me to believe that there's anyone who's an audience for this show who's never watched a Quentin Tarantino movie. But in the small chance that there is someone who like you've heard these things and these things, like just forget about them. Go out and start with one and work your way through, because you're missing out. So the soundtrack. Back in 2014, Tarantino revealed in an interview that the entire soundtrack budget was spent securing Stuck in the Middle with You for the film. And he was absolutely fine having no other music in it as long as he could use that song, which is, again, a very Tarantino thing to be like, I don't give a shit about any other music as long as I can like secure this particular song. Because I guarantee you in his head, he knew exactly how he wanted that scene. You know what I mean? Like I guarantee you to a T that scene. He may have written the movie around that scene.
I think it's possible. And when you look at how well that scene hits, and we were talking, just that shot of Kirk Boltz's eyes with the song beginning, and you're like, yeah, I can absolutely see that being the foundation for everything else.
And luckily what happened is he managed to secure the other songs because the producers made a record deal for the soundtrack, and they were aware that at the time that plan might not have worked out at all, but it actually did in the end. Now, another thing that Tarantino did, because again, they had a limited budget, which is why you've only got, as far as soundtracks go, there's only 8 songs and then a bunch of snippets of bits from the movie dialogue and Stephen Wright's bits from the radio. But so this is cool. Tarantino wanted to put dialogue like that on the soundtrack CD because not just to pad it out. He could have done 2 and made it a 10 song, a 10 track thing, which at that point was, because really at the end of the day, this is an EP. If you look at like this track list, but he knew that the soundtrack would act as a reminder of the film to people listening to it. And just in case somebody happened upon the soundtrack without seeing the movie, that they might be like, well, I should check this out. And, it actually worked out in the end too, because the soundtrack at the time that it came out, obviously a soundtrack for a movie that played at Sundance and opened in 19 theaters isn't going to be one that like climbs the fucking charts.
Yeah.
But in the time since, it has sold 850,000 copies in the US and well over 1 million elsewhere in the world. So it's become a very well bought soundtrack. So like I said, it didn't chart, but it eventually sold a lot of copies. The day that it released was October 13th, 1992. So the top 10 albums, the week that it came out was Garth Brooks' The Chase at number 1, REM's Automatic for the People at number 2, number 3's Eric Clapton's Unplugged, number 4 is Billy Ray Cyrus's Some Gave All, which is the second time that's popped up on here. It was also on, I believe, the Muppet Christmas Carol episode with Rachel. Number 5 was Prince of the New Power Generation's Love Symbol album. Number 6 was Michael Bolton's The Classics. Number 7 was Pearl Jam's 10. Number 8 was Peter Gabriel's Us. Number 9 was Mary J. Blige's What's the 411? And number 10 was Alice in Chains' Dirt. It's just so weird going back to these lists sometimes because, 92 was about the year that music sort of started to change really over the course of the 90s. But when you get to these early 90s lists, there's some really grim shit in there. Like that list of albums is juxtapositioned with the top 10 list of movies is the
It's a grim time.
Yeah. Like, Mary J. Blige, that's good. Dirt's a good. Prince is good. Automatic for the People is fine. I like REM, but that's not one of my favorite REM albums. Anyway, but like if this were 1 year later, the top 10 list would probably be like 70% bangers, like it's it was
a liminal era.
I'm surprised that like CNC Music Factory didn't show up in here somewhere. Like that's when I think of like early 90s, like barren wasteland of good music. Like I think of CNC Music Factory.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, like I said, the over half the soundtrack is dialogue or snippets from the movie. We're not really going to cover those. It's just, I mean, I do think that it was a smart idea and it is fun to hear them pop up, getting to hear the whole conversation. I love Keitel's bit about, popping them in the nose and like, if
you got a manager, that's a different story. He thinks he's a real cowboy. So you got to break that son of a bitch in two. You want something you won't tell him, cut off one of his fingers, the little one, then tell him his thumb's next. After that, he'll tell you if you're wearing a lady's underwear.
And then let's go get a taco.
Let's go get a taco.
Okay. So the first true song on the album is George Baker Selection's Little Green Bag. So that came from the album of the same name, Little Green Bag. George Baker Selection were a Dutch band, and they recorded this song completely self-funded. And it was a minor hit. It placed on Billboard's had like 8 million charts over the years, and there was one called the Cashbox chart that it placed at number 21. It made the Billboard Top 100, not very high, but when it came out in Reservoir Dogs, it became this sort of cult classic. It became a song that got resurrected, and it reached number 1 in Japan. It was used in a Japanese whiskey commercial, all because of this movie. The original title was Little Greenback after the US dollar, but they changed it. And a lot of people think the song's about weed, especially because there's like parts about where's the little green back and where's the little green bag. And so as far as this song goes, I feel like talked about the Madonna speech being a great introduction to the world of Tarantino and film. I feel like this song is about the best introduction you can get to Tarantino's music sensibilities.
Yes. Some shit you never heard of, but is an absolute banger. And when coupled with just a perfect accompanying image, it forms an indelible groove in your brain.
Yeah. And the other thing is though, Tarantino is okay with like I mean, Steelers Wheel, that was a pretty big hit. But like, he's never been one of those people like, Tarantino's not, I feel like Tarantino's not in any way like true, like an annoying music hipster. Like, this song at least had some popularity in the US. It might be one that even some people watching it were like, oh shit, I remember that song. But like, he's not the type who's going to use like Jandek farting on a drum in the fucking woods.
Right, yeah.
Nobody's ever heard this. Like, I feel like he's somebody who likes to be like, remember this song? Or like, hey, here's a cool song that you may not know. But like, he's always had that sort of populist sensibility. So, and I think that comes through in the soundtracks as well, because like you said, it's not a known song, but like for certain music listeners who dig a little deeper, like I'm sure there are plenty who knew what it was, but it's not one of those ones that it's like Quentin Tarantino is the only person who knew this song existed.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, with the imagery of them walking down the street and your like introduction to the cool guy Reservoir Dogs before everything goes fucking bad, it is a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great song, works really well in the movie. So next is Blue Suede's Hooked on a Feeling, which a lot of people who about my age know as the Dancing Baby song.
Yes, Ooga Chaka.
Yep.
Got to have rocks in your head the size of Gibraltar to go undercover.
Yeah, this song comes from, actually, again, same name. That was a big thing, obviously, back then. The album it came from was Hooked on a Feeling. Now, this is interesting. So this song was originally written in 1968 by Mark James, and it was more of like your standard hippie folk song. Like, if you listen to it, it's just like, I mean, it's not bad, but it just sounds like everything else of that era. 3 years later, it was covered by a British musician named Jonathan King, he's the one who added the Ooga Chaka part. That was not in the original song.
Mm-hmm.
And so Blue Suede did their cover a little closer to the Jonathan King version. But this is such a fucking square thing. They changed their lyrics. They changed the lyrics of the original song because they didn't want to have a drug reference in it, because the original lyrics, and it's not even a big drug reference. The original lyrics are, I got it bad for you, girl, but I don't need a cure. I'll just stay addicted and hope that I can endure. And they changed it to, got a bug for you, girl, but I don't need no cure. I'll stay a victim. I'll just stay a victim if I can, for sure. Like, it's not even like,
that doesn't make any sense. I'll just say a victim if I can, for sure. Gibberish.
I know. And like saying like, I'll just stay addicted and hope I can endure. It's obviously like about, I don't know. Yeah, but anyway, the song, I still like the song. It was a huge hit. It reached #1 in the US. And it stayed quiet for a while. And since Reservoir Dogs came out, it was used in, did you know that Ally McBeal is what spawned that Dancing Baby thing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, see, I didn't. I just knew it was, I didn't watch Ally McBeal, so I just knew it was like...
Well, hold on a minute. I wanted for the record that I didn't watch Ally McBeal either, but it was a ubiquitous piece of popular culture.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that you watched Ally McBeal.
On the record.
I'm editing that out. That part's coming out. It's gonna come out.
That's fine. As long as it's, I'm glad we're clearing the air, honestly, so no one will go around after this saying that I watched Ally McBeal.
I'm cutting out the part where you say not. It's gonna be like, for the record,
no,
I watched.
Sweet can.
How do you feel about this song? Because again, like you said, it was ubiquitous for a while, and I think if I had done this show in like 2002, I probably would have been a lot less fair to it. But yeah, I do like it. I mean, it's a very Tarantino thing again to use this very bubblegum pop song in the midst of this hyper violent movie.
Yeah,
but yeah, I still, even in my brain, I associate it with that fucking Dancing Baby email that for anybody who might be listening who's below the age of like 30, which I bet there's like maybe 2, it was like the first meme, basically. Like, it was like the first annoying like email chain meme thing. It was this dancing, terrible, old school CGI baby. But yeah, I do like the song though. Up next is Joe Tex's I Gotcha from the album of the same name. Once again, I Gotcha. Okay, do you know much about Joe Tex at all?
I just know the song and that it fucking rocks.
Okay. Joe Tex is, in general, he fucking ruled, and I'll get to him a little bit more when we finish this up, but he's a great catalog. So he actually wrote this song for another musician. King Floyd was the musician, but eventually decided he was going to keep it, and he had this career low. He hadn't had a hit in a really long time. And he released this song as a B-side for his song A Mother's Prayer. But this song was the one that radio DJs ended up spinning, and it became a big hit. It was actually his first hit in 5 years. Number one on the R&B charts, number two on the pop charts. So yeah, like you said, man, it's a fucking awesome song. And Joe Tex could do, he could do like sultry, but he also had this really great, almost James Brown, like from the depths of his fucking soul sort of wail. And he didn't always lean on it, but he does in this song. And again, just this fucking huge sounding song, the horns, his vocals. I love his little
Give
like,
it on up.
Yep. Yeah. The bit that he does at the beginning.
Yep.
And
it goes great with them beating up the policeman.
Well, and I mean, the title's I Gotcha. So, it's like one of those, like, it almost feels like a wink sort of in joke. Like they're literally have this cop tied up and they're dragging him in and they're getting ready to torture him. Like, I gotcha. Like, but yeah, it's a fucking awesome song. And honestly, I wouldn't even put it in his top 5 songs. But like I said, I'll do some more Joe Tex when we close out at the end. Okay. So, Bedlam's Magic Carpet Ride. I would call this the one dud on here.
Yes. This is the one that I would generally fast forward when I was listening to it.
So this is one of those weird ones where this was one of the 2 originals. Bedlam were the only ones that recorded original songs for the movie. You can literally find nothing about these guys. They have one entry on Discogs. They had an album called Into the Coals that came out in 1992. They're out of Nashville. I don't remember if I said that or not. They're from Nashville. And these 2 songs that ended up in this soundtrack somehow, and there's never anything else that they've ever released. They don't have any. I mean, you can find nothing about them. It's like they're fucking ghosts.
Interesting.
Yeah. And obviously the reason they went with the cover of Magic Carpet Ride is to keep the costs down. So
right.
But here's the thing. So the song Magic Carpet Ride is one of those songs that, like, I liked it when I was probably 18. And this isn't like a Doors situation, like the Doors, where I think that I cringe thinking about how much I like the Doors when I was like 17, 18 years old. Yeah, I still like it, but I would call this like a jukebox song. And by that, I mean, like, if I'm at some dive bar that has an old fashioned jukebox, which there's one that I used to frequent a lot before COVID, and this song was on there, like, that would be a situation where if I put a couple quarters in and it was like, well, my choices are like Garth Brooks' Friends in Low Places or Steppenwolf's Magic Carpet Ride. Like, I might play that song, but outside of that, I'm never going to listen to and we're talking about the original now. The cover, I would not put on if it were one of the songs on the jukebox. Here's the thing about this. If someone asked me if I had never heard the song and someone said, what would you think an early 90s cover of Steppenwolf's Magic Carpet Ride would sound like, I think I would have like been able to form it in my head note for note.
Yeah. Not surprising anybody.
Yeah. Real shitty early 90s production. Yeah, it's the one dud on the whole album, which again, when you're only dealing with 8 songs, whatever, you got one skipper. So what? Up next is Sandy Rogers' Fool for Love. So this was actually on a soundtrack for Robert Altman's 1985 movie Fool for Love. It was the title track from the movie. And yeah, this is a great song. I think 80s country is pretty hit or miss. And like, it's mostly because of 80s production reasons, but I really like this song. And again, works great as far as the movie itself goes.
And I think it's interesting that, so one of the great things about the soundtrack is that it has this motif to it that, this whole movie takes place during K. Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s weekend. A couple of these songs are diegetic, so that has this 70s vibe. And then you have this 80s country song, which is something that Mr. Orange is listening to in his apartment before he goes and gets picked up, which just gives you a little glimpse into his personality and contrasts it with the rest of the material, just to give you the idea, like, he's into shit that nobody else is really on the same page with, and it's his. And we only get this like little glimpse of it before he goes back into the demi-monde.
I hadn't thought of it that way. That's cool. Thank you for bringing that in here. Yeah, that's something that and now when I watch the movie, that's one of those things that I'll remember whenever it comes on, that scene. But yeah, it's a great song though. And even when I got this soundtrack, I was very back in the day, very like, country music, but I always like this one. Okay, so up next is Stealers Wheel, Stuck in the Middle, or if you had LimeWire, Bob Dylan, Stuck in the Middle.
Joe Egan and Jerry Rafferty's Dylan-esque pop bubblegum classic.
Well, you know what? The Dylan thing was intentional. Like, it was a parody of him. Whether or not there was like a maliciousness or mean-spiritedness behind it, I'm not totally sure. but that was absolutely intentional that they had like tried to sound like Dylan doing this, and in a like a parodying sort of way, but it ended up being this fucking huge hit. And here's the thing. I actually really like Jerry Rafferty. Most famous for Baker Street, but I love Baker Street. That whole album, actually, City to City with Baker Street on it, is awesome. There's a song called The Ark, which is probably my favorite song of his, but his best single is Right Down the Line, which is off that too. I mean, that's Right Down the Line is one of those songs that, like, if you're hearing this and you're like, I don't know that one, and you played it, you'd be like, oh, that song. Like, it's on a lot of radio stations if you listen to like oldies radio stations, but you might not realize it's him. It's kind of that situation with like America and Sister Golden Hair not being the big hit, but Horse with No Name being the big hit, whereas that is obviously the better of the two goddamn songs. But yeah, anyway, Stuck in the Middle is one of those songs that, like, whether or not it's a dig or it's parody and it's mean-spirited, look, the Dylan thing that he's trying here works, and it's like what makes the song as good as it is.
Absolutely. There's that weird keening, whining voice.
Yeah.
Which chillingly Mr. Blonde kind of does a little bit of while he's dancing around. He just kind of mutters it a little bit.
I would love to pick Tarantino's brain and find out why this song. Like, what was it that made
I think I know.
Okay, let's hear it.
Please.
Oh.
The idea of somebody getting tortured and the sound and this bubbly, fun song counterposing it, and then within that song, just this plea, this please. I think that's it. That's my suspicion anyway.
I'll go with
that's what stuck with me more than anything is just that sound while this guy's thrashing around getting chopped up.
And he does sound like that does in the song itself. I mean, yeah, like you said, there's like a warbly sort of quality to his voice as he's doing it because he's doing that Dylan impression.
Yeah.
That like you said, it actually sounds like
he is begging to stop getting tortured.
Hey, I like that theory, and it's better than anything I've got. So let's go with that.
Yeah.
So we've got another Bedlam song, Harvest Moon, which thankfully is not a Neil Young cover. So this is the better of their two by a fucking huge margin. Like, this I actually did last week. I recorded for another podcast called Force 5, where the top 5 list guest comes up with the list, and the host does the list along with you, and so it comes up with their own things. And I did a top 5 soundtrack one-hit wonders, and this was one that I actually considered, but by which I mean it didn't have to be a hit, but like an artist who had like a soundtrack song inexplicably somehow, and then like maybe either never released another album, put an album out down the road, but like pretty much vanished after the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And this almost made it, because I do think this is a really solid song, and I would have never guessed that it was the same band who did that shitty cover.
Yeah. Did you do, just out of curiosity, did you put Urge Overkill on that list?
I think they're a little more famous. I did Lady Arage's Afro Puffs.
Ah.
I don't want to spoil the whole thing. Yeah, it was Urge Overkill's goddamn. You know what though? I actually did like that song.
Oh no, it's great. I mean, it's a cover though, again.
Yeah, it's a really good cover too. My record player has been sitting upstairs because I had to move it for some shit, so I haven't even had a chance to listen to that vinyl yet, but pretty excited to get to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 8 is Harry Nilsson's, the final song on it is Harry Nilsson's Coconut. So it's from the album Nilsson Schmilsson. Obviously, like, Harry Nilsson was fucking awesome. He was awesome. He could do ballad. The thing about what made Harry Nilsson so good was he was very eclectic. Like, he could do these great ballads like Without You, and like sort of folky, like Everybody's Talking, and bouncy fun stuff like Gotta Get Up. But then he also had this like really weird goofy side that did songs like this. And this will never be my favorite Harry Nilsson song, like, by any means, but I do like when he's working in this mode, and it's a funny fucking song to include in this movie and on here.
And it's wild where it is in the film. It's the credits music directly after everybody gets shot. Just this goofy fucking song. And I remember just watching the credits, just kind of having been blown away, and my expectations of films being also blown away, and then this song is playing at the same time, and it just being this weirdly chilling and also funny.
That's what I think. That's again, without knowing exactly why, but I feel like the reason he probably went with this at the end is to let you kind of breathe a little bit once that all is over. Like, remind you that because the movie's very funny.
Yes.
I mean, but it gets, I mean, it's very fucking tense in that last little bit, and everyone dies.
No,
It's
you need a
real
little,
fucking grim.
you need some sort of cathartic. Yeah.
Breathe a little bit at the end. Well, that's the soundtrack. Just to we'll do a quick some statistics here, and then we can wrap this up. Songs in the movie that were not on the soundtrack. There's only 3, and it's Dwight Mickelson's Western Country, Jim Jacobson's Country's Cool, and the Kronberg Strings, It's Country. I'm not even really 100% sure where they appear in the movie. I meant to look for that last night and didn't catch it.
Yeah, I don't remember.
The only things I ever recognize are the actual needle drop sort of things. But okay, is it on Spotify? Everything but Sandy Rogers' Fool for Love is on Spotify, and that includes the movie snippets. They actually have all of those on there. Okay, I already know your answer to this one, but if you had to choose, would you consider this movie an essential, like essentially you have to see Pulp Fiction? Would you consider it like, hey, watch it if you get a chance, or would you say skip it?
No, you got to see Reservoir Dogs. Because it, in its own way, was just as influential as Pulp Fiction.
Well, I mean, without Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction would never have existed.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an essential. There's literally like no question.
Yeah.
The soundtrack, would you consider the soundtrack, you know, if you were like, go buy this album, like you have to own this is essential, would you say, hey, check it out if you get a chance on Spotify, sort of stream it, skip it, or cherry pick certain songs off of it?
I mean, it's only 8 songs. It's worth having and listening to, for sure, the whole thing.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it. Like, there's one state, and it's like, Magic Carpet Ride is bad, but like it's not like offensively bad. That like if I were working and I had it playing somewhere that I didn't feel like getting up and fucking hitting fast forward, like I'm not gonna like lose my mind listening to it. Like I could get through the 3 minutes without suffering. It's just not a good song. Okay, so do you think the two work well together, the soundtrack and the movie? Like, do you think?
I mean, like I said, the conceit of the film like gives the logic to the whole soundtrack with the whole K Billy thing. So they're symbiotic in a really cool way.
And it also, in the long run, it's again, the soundtrack and the movie both work as an introduction to Tarantino's sort of oddball styles and tastes and fascinations. And you know, he also at one point said that he wanted to make a movie that when he made this, he wanted it to feel like a movie that was made in the 50s and the 70s at the same time. And I feel like the music, particularly, pull away the gore and the blood, you know, you've got sort of if you took out the violence in this, you'd have a pretty standard, like not standard, but you'd have like a 50s sort of pot boiler. You know what I mean? Like
like Suddenly or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But the music definitely does the large work on the latter too. Like it sets it like the tone of like this being, because I don't think Tarantino's ever had a song in his movies that was made after like 1987.
Yeah.
Okay, top 3. What would you pick as your top 3 on the soundtrack? Again, we're only working to 8 here, so it's
that's easy. I would go, honestly, I Gotcha number 1, then Stuck in the Middle with You, and then Little Green Bag.
I mean, again, we're working with 8 songs here, but this is the first time it's happened on here where I literally have the exact same top 3 as you.
Hell yeah.
In order, too. Yeah, it literally in order. That's what I had as my top.
Well, I mean, that's clearly the correct answer, the objectively correct answer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're right here. Okay. So real quick, I'll get some further watching, further listening sort of stuff, and you can throw in some things too if you'd like to. I'm going to start with, actually, I mentioned that Conte earlier, the Bollywood semi-remake of Reservoir Dogs it's actually quite good, and I would suggest if you can find it somewhere easily, check it out. I said I was going to come back to Joe Tex. Joe Tex has a greatest hits album. If you're looking for an easy starting point, he has a greatest hits album called 25 All-Time Greatest Hits. Not a flashy title, but I really recommend it. And if you don't want to dedicate yourself to that, go on Spotify. I'm assuming it's on Spotify, all of his catalog, but you can find songs. The songs I would suggest just to start off is Hold What You Got, You Better Get It, You Said a Bad Word, and A Sweet Woman Like You are all like great starting off points outside of I Got You. If you've never heard that, obviously put that on the list as well. And I would also suggest Jerry Rafferty's City to City album. So anything you want to toss in as far as like, hey, you know, if you like this, check this out.
The film that he sort of ripped off to make Reservoir Dogs, Ringo Lam's City on Fire, a Hong Kong film from 1987 starring Chow Yun-fat. which is where guys in suits doing a bank heist and then Mexican standoff. He kind of pulled from there, so you can kind of see where he was getting the inspiration there with that movie.
It's funny you say that because Tarantino actually did a double feature screening of City on Fire and that Bollywood remake.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
it's a cultural human centipede, the three of them.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for us. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Obviously everybody knows Chapo, but you've got another show. Talk about that if you want to tell some people about your other show.
Oh, well, it's called Hell of Presidents. It's on Stitcher Premium. It's about the U.S. history through the presidents, and it's still there if you want to listen to it, if you haven't.
And then I obviously pitched Chapo too. If for some reason I've said this with both Will and Felix. I'm like, if there's like one person here who, for whatever reason, has not heard it, go ahead.
Yeah. Go for it. Give it a shot. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, and I'll put the links for both of those in the show descriptions for anybody who, again, for whatever reason, is here without knowing at least what Chapo is. So, yeah. Matt, thank you so much for coming on and doing this, and I'm really glad that you're the one who helped me kick off my eventual work through Tarantino's catalog as I do this, and I'm glad that you started right from the beginning because it feels like the way to go with this.
Absolutely,
I don't want to jump into the middle. So,
yeah.
Matt, you have a great night, and everybody listening at home, I hope you have a great weekend.
Bye.